Well, what a great crowd. Thanks everybody for being here today. And I'm just really happy to be here, believe me. This has been a great rebranding of the Limelight. Am I holding this right now? Okay. And it's been a lot of work to do this, but a lot of fun. And I want to thank the Mikacich family for letting me do this, for putting up all my baseball history. This is like a museum to me. This is great. And also for making me feel like part of the Mikacich family. It's been a wonderful time. I need to thank some of my people that helped me with the historical aspects. Tom Crisp, who's going to be the next speaker after me. Rick Cabral, who's always helpful and has a website called Baseball Sacramento, so you should check that out. Chris Lango's been helpful, and he's our videographer today. And also Jane, she took my somewhat boring baseball history and these great images and turned it into art. If you guys look on the walls, it's great stuff. Now, yeah, Jane. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So anyway, the way this works is if you come up here later and you walk around looking at these and you read all these captions, you're going to get the history of old-time Sacramento baseball all the way out to 1960 with this picture of Kuno Berrigan catching for the Solons. So my thing is old-time Sacramento baseball, and I know that's probably a little dry for some people, so I'll try to rush through it a bit. But I grew up in the Hollywood Park area of Sacramento, attended Solon games as a kid, went to McClatchy, played some sports there, tried to, and I've always had an interest in Sacramento's history, and so being the Solons historian just kind of fell in my lap. I love it. So I think most people don't know that baseball's been played in Sacramento since the Gold Rush. It came out with the Gold Rush because people brought their customs, they brought their how they cooked, they brought everything, their pastime. So baseball was here with the Gold Rush. Now there's stories of Alexander Cartwright coming out and spreading baseball all the way to Hawaii, coming through Sacramento and whatnot, like Johnny Appleseed. It's probably just a story, but he was here, and that's kind of interesting. But the actual first account, the first factual account we have of baseball was in Sacramento in 1859 in the Sacramento Union. So it does go back quite a ways. And in those days, though, it was a gentleman's game. It was played on Sunday. You just put an announcement in the paper, said, I got 8 guys, we'll meet you down at the park, and you go play. So it wasn't that big a deal. But all of a sudden, teams started forming, and then they started having leagues, and it became more than a gentleman's game, because you might be a gentleman that owned a business, but you notice some of the guys working on the loading dock were pretty strong and pretty good athletes, and all of a sudden they're on your team, and they didn't have to work as hard after that. And then there was a lot of gambling going on, and competition and gambling, and all of a sudden the game's becoming what we call semi-pro. There's a little money involved. So by the 1860s, we've got leagues, we've got some semi-pro ball. And in 1871, the first league was formed. The first professional league was the National Association, which 5 years later became the National League. Now, the first professional baseball team was the 1869 Cincinnati Reds. And that's the same year they opened the Transcontinental Railroad. And they were on the train that summer, later in the summer, and came out here, got off the train, took a steamship, because that's how you went to San Francisco in those days, went down, played some teams down there, trounced them, came back to Sacramento, played our all-star team, beat them 50-6. So baseball's been here a while, but we haven't always won all the games. So, well, going into the 1870s, we still have leagues forming, semi-pro, and back east, you've got a few more professional leagues starting. And we had some semi-pro leagues forming in California. But by 1883, it became a truly professional sport, part of organized baseball. The California League started in 1883 in the Bay Area. We had teams in San Francisco and Oakland. LA was too small still and too far away. They hadn't taken all the water from the Owens Valley, so it was a desert still. And anyway, but in 1886, our top semi-pro team, the Altas, Alta's an old term for Northern California. So the Sacramento Altas joined the California League. So they were fairly competitive. We didn't win any championships. And that's the first picture right over here on the wall is the Altas. And every time you start talking baseball, there's always great little side stories. They're starting shortstop. If you look down at some of Jane's artwork, is Billy Newbert, Newbert's hardware store. I think we all went there to get whatever we needed back before it closed in 1993. So it was called the Altas. Then in 1890, they changed to the Senators because this is the state capital. So they've come and gone with that state capital theme. But baseball, here we are in a restaurant and a bar. There's always been some crossover with alcohol. And it's nice to have it again today. I think beer and baseball go together. I think they really do. But as we go into the late 1890s, in the middle of the 1890s, there was a depression. So most sports stopped. The California League stopped. The Sacramento Senators went away. But 1898, the California League was back. And guess what? Sacramento had a team in there called the Gilt Edge. Some of you are holding Gilt Edge beer. There's a can right over there. And the team right behind Jane over here was called the Gilt Edge. That was the team in the California League. And they were also called the Brewers, just like the Milwaukee Brewers. So we had that team. And they won the California League Championship, which was the West Coast. There wasn't another big league out here except that one. 3 years in a row, 1898, 1899, 1900. I think we call that a three-peat today. So Sacramento has a real heavy sports history back in those days. So as that team went forward, they realized, well, you can't have a sponsor's name. They changed back to the Senators. So they became the Senators again. And then in 1901, they kept playing. 1902, they kept playing. But in 1903, something really big happened. The Pacific Coast League formed. And the very first game was here between Sacramento and the Oakland Oaks, and we won 7-4. We probably should have quit there because we didn't have such good records after that for a while, but very first Coast League game was right here. And at that time, I mean, you know, you can say Major League Baseball now, but up until after World War II, those were just the West Coast leagues. The Pacific Coast League was the third major league. And it was recognized by many folks as being just as competitive. You know, Joe Marty was with the Phillies. He came back to Sacramento because they paid him more. And he's quoted as saying, the competition is just as good, and they pay me more. And maybe the pitching's not quite as good, but I'm a big fish in a small pond. But anyway, so we continue on. And in 1903, while we're in the Pacific Coast League, we're still a small market. And what happens in small markets, it's kind of like the Kings thing. They almost go away. I mean, you know about the Sacramento Kings here and what's going on, and you're coming and going with that. Well, our team, the Sacramento Senators, after 1903, went to Tacoma. The state of Washington keeps trying to steal Sacramento sports teams. And they won the Pacific Coast League Championship in 1904 with the same guys we had here in 03. And they stayed up there for a couple of years. Meantime, we didn't have professional sports again, or professional baseball team until 1906. And we had a team in the California State League, which was an outlaw league, but it was still a top-level league. And that name of that team was the Cordovas. And it wasn't Rancho Cordova, because Rancho Cordova didn't exist then. It was named after, here we go, alcohol again, a wine called Cordova wine. And that was one of the sponsors. But it was our professional team. It'd be like going to River Cats game tonight. You go out and see the Cordovas play. And so we've got them up on the wall as well. Now, they played as the Cordovas for 2 years and changed back again to the Senators. They keep going back to the Senators. So in 1908, the Sacramento Senators in the California State League. Well, Charlie Graham had been with the team a lot. And Charlie Graham went on later to own the Seals and was a major player with the Seals. He sold Joe DiMaggio to the Yankees later on. But he was in Sacramento at that time. And so he got the team back in 1909 back into the Pacific Coast League. So we got back into the better league, the third major league, the Pacific Coast League, where we stayed all the way through 1914. But in 1910, another big event happened. Edmonds Field, a lot of folks remember Edmonds Field, Riverside and Broadway. It started out as Buffalo Park. And Buffalo Park was co-sponsored by the Buffalo Brewery. So we have another cut over to alcohol, if you will. But the most interesting thing in my mind is it was set up by a former Gilt Edge player named Ed Kripp. And Ed Kripp knew what he was doing because at that time, Broadway was called Y Street. It was also a levee, and the road went along the top because when flood season came, they wanted everything south of there to flood because there wasn't anything out there. So you went from the Y Street levee and you walked down into Buffalo Park. But the best thing was there was also the city limit, and you could sell beer at the ballpark. They couldn't do it in, yeah. So, and also the enforcement of gambling laws out there was a little laxer. So anyway, so the ballpark's out there, Riverside and Broadway, and we're going through history, but we're a small market team again. And about halfway through the 1914 season, the team just picked up in the middle of the night, kind of like I think the Indianapolis Colts had done one time, and moved to San Francisco as the Missions and finished out the 1914 season. Now, the fans weren't crazy about this, and they became the Salt Lake City Bees in 1915. Now, 1915, 16, and 17, we didn't have professional teams, but we did have baseball, and Tom Crisp, the next speaker, will talk about some of the really good caliber semi-pro ball that was going on in those days, and started off what became ultimately the Winter Leagues and some of the Busher Leagues that people like Jane Mikacich and Kuno Berrigan played in as well. So anyway, 1918, Charlie Graham comes back and steals a team basically from Portland. We get basically the Portland Beavers come, and they become the Solons, and they stuck around to 1960. Yeah. And actually the official name then was still the Senators. They're the Senators up to 1935. But you're a sports writer and you don't have enough room in the paper, you call them the Solons, because that was a nickname for a legislator. Now, they also had other names at times, like the Sacks, S-A-C-T-S. And when Harry Wolverton managed them, they called them the Wolves. There's a little token in this little frame up here. It says the Wolves schedule. So they did a lot of things with nicknames that we don't really do much anymore. So here we are up to 1918. 1920 comes along, and we got the Mooring era, and we got Charlie Mooring here. Yeah, and I think we've got some relatives in the group here, right here. We've got Mooring's grandson, Lou Mooring and Charlie Mooring. Yeah, yeah. And we had, yeah, it's right there, right here, yeah. And Lou Mooring was a smart man. He hired Charlie Doyle, who had played for years here, as the general manager. And between the two of them, they brought a lot of talent out of Sacramento. But the problem was, small market, they had to sell them. Like Stan Hack, probably the best player to come out of Sacramento. We had to sell him to the Cubs just to make, you know, so we could get to the next season with the rest of the team. And then we go along into the 1930s. We have the Depression. Mooring loses the team. But the St. Louis Cardinals buy the team, and Branch Rickey sets up one of the first farm systems. So we're a farm team of the St. Louis Cardinals. You can see one of the uniforms down there. It's got an S and a cardinal. So this is Sacramento Solons. And also they changed the name officially to Solons from Senators at that time. So we're now officially the Senators. And as we go through time, the teams get better. We're getting some talent from the Cardinals. And we get our very first, until the River Cats came, Pacific Coast League Championship in 1942. And I want you to come read about Tony Freitas, because he actually won the last 2 games of this 7-game series. We were down 5 games, or down 4 games with 5 to go, and we beat the Los Angeles Angels. And they were heavily favored to beat us. But the war came along, and guess what happened? They took all the ball players, and they had to go fight. They had to go fight the war, basically. So baseball takes a major hit on a national basis. They start shrinking things. We won the 42 pennant. In 43, we have another record. We had the worst Pacific Coast League record ever. We still hold that record, unfortunately, because they were playing teenagers. They had Nippy Jones playing at the age of like 16. They had all these old guys. Wasn't good baseball in 1943, 44, 45. And the Cardinals said, well, this isn't making money for us. So they put the team up for sale. Tacoma said, we'll buy it. Yubi Saparovich and Dick Edmonds went door to door, literally, and sold stock, saved the team by going to the Pacific Coast League meeting in Los Angeles with a bag of cash and checks, threw it on the table. They said, okay, you guys can keep a team. They kept the team. Some of the other highlights going later into the 40s, you can see over there is in 1948, very suspiciously, they just moved the insurance up. The ballpark burned down. There's a lot of older folks here that remember July 11th, 1948. And the team had to play as a road team the rest of that year. And then going into the 50s, because we're a small market, we didn't do very well. We didn't make a lot of money. And then the Giants and Dodgers came out, and we struggled on through the 1960 season, and then they became the Hawaii Islanders after that. And then briefly, and it was downsized to AAA, and briefly in 1974, 5, and 6, we had the Sacramento Solons at Hughes Stadium, and if you remember that, it was home run derby. So there's about 125 years of baseball history in 10 minutes.